Somebody had run RMstar on the drive where all of the Toy Story 2 files were kept, and things just started to disappear.
Woody's hat disappeared, and then his boots disappeared. And then as we kept checking, he disappeared entirely. Woody's gone. And soon after that, whole sequences, the Toy Barn and Andy's room were disappearing off the disk drive. Back to Pixar, and 4 or 5 of us carried it in like you would an Egyptian pharaoh. Boot it up, machine turns on. Oh look, there's the movie.
Thanks to Eli, my newborn baby Eli, and my need to work from home, we had a backup of Toy Story 2.
This is a story you've probably all heard before. The legend of how an unnamed member of staff at Pixar accidentally ran a line of code that deleted Toy Story 2 months away from its release date, and how Galen Sussman saved the movie thanks to having a backup at her house from her maternity leave. That clip wasn't just on the Toy Story 2 DVD, it's available to watch on Disney Plus as an extra right now. It's a story that most movie fans know. It's a story of legend. One of Pixar's best and most beloved movies nearly lost to time due to one line of code. But here's the thing, it's not entirely accurate. While it is true that this line of code deleted upwards of 90% of Toy Story 2 and Sussman saved it by driving her back up to the Pixar offices, this version of events misses off one crucial detail. The Toy Story 2 that code nearly deleted by accident was deleted just a few months later on purpose. This is the true story of Toy Story 2's deletion and how Disney have lied to you about it. But first, we want to say thank you to this episode's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, who have played a big part in the relaunch of Cutscene. We all know what a VPN is by now, but for those of you who don't, it's a virtual private network that will protect your data as well as get you access to geo-blocked content from around the world. Protect your data while you're out and about and using public Wi-Fi locations, ensuring those pesky hackers keep their grubby mitts off your personal information and passwords, and gain access to region-locked content like Max, Hulu, BBC iPlayer, and so much more. Why should you only watch the movies and TV shows that your country say you should watch? Try everything from all over the world. Surfshark has 3,200 servers in over 100 countries, and you can use it on unlimited devices with access to 24/7 customer support. They even offer a bundle called Surfshark One, which includes the VPN, antivirus, private search, and data leak alerts all together to keep you fully secure. Secure your privacy with Surfshark today with their 30-day money-back guarantee, so there is no risk at all. Use the promo code CUTSCENE to get 4 months extra for free at surfshark.deals/cutscene. That's 4 months extra for free using the promo code CUTSCENE at surfshark.deals/cutscene. While this won't fully explain why the House of Mouse have lied over the years, it's worth noting that the relationship between Disney and Pixar has been a fraught one before Disney purchased them in 2006. I won't go into the full ins and outs of the Disney-Pixar deal because that feels like another video entirely, but the basic thrust of it is this. In 1991, Pixar and Disney signed a 3-picture deal where not only did Disney have creative sign-off on all the scripts, they also owned all of the characters as well as sole discretion over any sequels, spin-offs, TV shows, or direct-to-video movies. In his book, The Pixar Touch, David A. Price writes, Pixar would get a minimal share of revenues and it would have no creative say whatsoever. After the release and huge success of Toy Story, this became a 5-picture deal starting with A Bug's Life that saw a bit of better revenue share for Pixar, but Disney still owned everything they made. For their part, Pixar just wanted to make sure that when people went to see a Pixar movie, they didn't think it was a new Disney release. This 1997 deal ensured that Disney and Pixar would have equal billing. But there is a key part to that original deal which is needed context for this video. Disney could make straight-to-video releases based on Pixar movies, and it just so happens that this was their new biggest money-making venture. In 1994, Disney released The Return of Jafar, a sequel to the hugely successful Aladdin. That movie cost nearly $30 million to make, but because Return of Jafar was being made by the much cheaper TV animation department, it only cost around $3 million to make. So when the Los Angeles Times reported in May of 1994 that Return of Jafar had sold 1.5 million copies in its first 48 hours, it was a total game changer for Disney. By the end of spring, it had sold over 10 million copies. It became one of Disney's best-selling home videos, and it was made for a fraction of the cost of a big screen movie. A slew of straight-to-video releases soon hit shelves based on major Disney properties. Aladdin and the King of Thieves in 1996, Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas in 1997, Pocahontas 2: Journey to a New World, and The Lion King 2: Simba's Pride in 1998, Hercules: Zero to Hero in 1999, The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea in 2000. They even did live-action sequels like 1997's Honey, We Shrank Ourselves. Soon, Bambi, Cinderella, Tarzan, and even The Hunchback of Notre Dame were all getting sequels, all of which were going straight to video. And Disney wanted Toy Story to be among those titles. In March of 1997, a press release announced production has begun on a straight-to-video sequel to the hit computer-animated feature Toy Story. Walt Disney Studios and Pixar Animation Studios say Toy Story 2 will bring back Tim Allen and Tom Hanks as the voice of astronaut Buzz Lightyear and Cowboy Woody. Producer Ralph Guggenheim is quoted in the release saying Toy Story 2 is likely to be a solid moneymaker for Disney because its production cost should be much lower than its originals. Price writes in the Pixar Touch that there were discussions about whether Toy Story 2 would be computer animated by Pixar or cel animated by Disney, especially as Disney owned the characters per the deal. But Lasseter is quoted in Charles Solomon's The Toy Story film saying, "I didn't want anyone else to animate our characters. We'll do this in-house. We'll do it more quickly." He may not have had much choice anyway, as the Pixar Touch also writes that the contract signed with Disney in 1991 stated that Pixar would be the first in line to serve as the production house for such projects. So this meant that it fell to Pixar to not only make their first sequel, but also their first direct-to-video venture, and it was the first time they were making two movies at the same time, Toy Story 2 and A Bug's Life. And because most of Pixar was busy on A Bug's Life, and the whole point of a direct-to-video movie is to be cheaper than its theatrical counterpart, Pixar turned to their Interactive Products Group, a division that solely focused on the video game and CD-ROM market. To that end, they had made two CD-ROMs based on Toy Story, the Toy Story Animated Storybook and the Toy Story Activity Center, both in 1996, which saw the voice cast return from Toy Story with the exception of Hanks and Alan, who were replaced by Tom's younger brother Jim Hanks as Woody and Pat Fraley as Buzz Lightyear. And if you're wondering to yourself why the name Pat Fraley sounds familiar, he's this guy.
I'm an equal opportunity tyrant.
Yeah, Buzz was voiced by Krang. Steve Jobs was convinced that CD-ROMs made by Interactive Products Group would sell upwards of 10 million copies. However, Pam Kervin, the head of the group, told him that while they would make money and would be profitable, their first two releases sold nearly 1 million units, they would never make as much money as a movie. And so in the same month that Toy Story 2 was announced, Jobs shut down Interactive Products Group and they became the core group behind this direct-to-video venture. This makes sense, as Price writes in the Pixar Touch, between the two CD-ROM products, the Interactive Products Group created as much original animation as there was in Toy Story itself. In his book Creativity Inc., former Pixar president Ed Catmull writes, "Because this is only a sequel, we told ourselves, it wouldn't be as arduous to make as the original. The problem," Catmull writes, "is that it created an A team, A Bug's Life, and a B team, Toy Story 2. Colin Brady and Ash Brannon, two animation directors from the original, were promoted to direct Toy Story 2, and it was thought that their inexperience would be supported by Toy Story 2 story layout being done by John Lasseter and the team behind the first movie." Catmull adds, "While we question the quality of most sequels made for the video market, we thought we could do better. Right away, we realized we had made a terrible mistake." The idea behind Toy Story 2 was a fairly simple one. Toys are on this earth to be played with. That's all a toy really wants, and it's what gives them the most joy. Lasseter and Pete Docter met for lunch and they discussed that, since the release of the first movie, Lasseter had a growing collection of toys from the movie signed by the actors who played them. And because they were now valuable, he didn't want his kids to play with them. His realization was that this should be Woody's journey for the second movie, almost like a midlife crisis. And Docter began working on a treatment. Ed Catmull writes in Creativity Inc., "The film always began with Woody preparing to go to cowboy camp with Andy, only to suffer a rip in his arm that would force Andy to leave him behind, and Andy's mother would put him on the shelf, and that Woody would be sold at a yard sale and bought by a toy collector who would lock them away, never to be played with again, in order to sell them to a museum in Japan." That is sort of all that is known about this original version of Toy Story 2. In all the books and interviews, details are kept fairly vague. The only thing extra known for sure is this deleted character, Senorita Cactus, who was eventually replaced by Jessie. Some of you watching may point to this script posted online, claimed to be written by Doug Chamberlain and Chris Webb, who both have story credits on the final version of Toy Story 2. And it is dated December 1996, which ties in to the production timeline of March 1997. But there's no real verification as to whether this is the genuine original script of Toy Story 2. For the most part, it follows what we've talked about here and what's been written about the movie in literature. Wheezy is missing from this draft, he was added in later, more on that in a bit. Prospector is out of his box, Senorita Cactus is alive and well, and the central premise of the movie is about being a collector's item and what it means to be one. I've just been unable to verify if this is the genuine article. It does follow a similar story as to what's been written about in Creativity Inc., the Toy Story films, and the Pixar Touch, with Woody and his torn arm being taken by Al the Collector, where he meets the rest of Woody's roundup: Prospector, Senorita Cactus, and Bullseye, who in this script can talk. Bullseye actually takes on some of the emotions that Jessie would eventually have in the final movie. Prospector explains that Woody, as a collector's item, has graduated to a whole new plane of toy existence. In their minds, being played with is ghastly, and that Woody has not realized this because, as Senorita Cactus puts it, he's been corrupted by a kid. As Buzz and the rest of the crew start their rescue mission, Woody attempts an escape of his own. Prospector, never referred to as Stinky Pete, and Senorita Cactus hatch a plan to break his spirit by revealing that Bullseye used to have a kid in the 1950s, but was thrown away when his father brought home a hula hoop, and threaten that Woody will meet a similar fate if he sticks around with Andy.
Who, didn't you say Danny, or whatever his name is, had a video game?
Oh, my friend, it's already over. Video games are the hula hoops of the 90s. Soon he'll discover comic books, rock and roll, and finally...
Senorita Cactus bats her eyelashes in a flirtatious way. Blink, 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 blink. She mimics a kiss.
You're already history, man.
What makes Woody rarer than the other Woody toys is that he still has his hat, and this piece of him raises his worth in the price guide, which acts as this group's Bible of sorts. In Al's Toy Barn, Buzz meets the model up from him, Ultra Buzz 2000, and unlike the final movie, he only features in this one scene where Buzz defeats the Emperor Zurg toy and Ultra Buzz hands over his new utility belt as a reward. Meanwhile, Al agrees to sell Woody and the Roundup gang to a New York museum, not a Japanese one as Ed Catmull writes in Creativity Inc., and when Buzz finds Woody, he discovers that his friend has been brainwashed by a weird toy cult. Woody tells Buzz that he won't go back to Andy's room because he doesn't want to end up like Bullseye, discarded and uncared for. The way his dialogue is written reflects the change in morals, as it matches the upper-class nature of Prospector and Senorita Cactus. Ignoring his friend's request, Buzz forcefully rescues Woody and they end up on Al's apartment roof. During the scuffle, Woody loses his hat. So when he nearly falls off the side of the building, Prospector and Senorita Cactus refuse to help.
Risk scuffing my sheen for a mere hatless Woody? Well, I never.
Might as well just let go. You're worthless now. Worthless!
Never liked you anyway. You have an attitude problem.
When Buzz rescues Woody and his hat, Prospector and Senorita Cactus attempt to welcome Woody back in with open arms, but it's too late, and Woody decides to go back to Andy's house with Buzz and Bullseye. The dramatic finale of the movie sees Woody and his friends drive Al's car whilst battling Prospector and Senorita Cactus, all while Al chases after them in a stolen Pizza Planet van. Woody reveals to his assailants that their battle is lost, as he proudly puts on a now charred hat declaring, "I am worthless." During the climactic battle, Prospector and Senorita Cactus are kicked off the car roof by Bullseye, and they are picked up by two boys who call them lame toys. And Al chases after them, demanding that they give him back, not his collector's items, his toys. Andy comes back from camp and is happy to see his friends Woody and Buzz, despite their scuffs, and his new toy, Bullseye. Whether this script for Toy Story 2 is real or not, Catmull writes in Creativity Inc. that this original version was an escape saga with a predictable and not very emotional arc. He adds, for the film to work, viewers have to believe the choice Woody is weighing. Returning to a world where Andy will someday outgrow and discard him, or remain in a place of security with no one to love him, was real. But since viewers knew the film was from Pixar and Disney, they would just assume there would be a happy ending, meaning that Woody would choose to go back and reunite with Andy. What the film needed were reasons to believe that Woody was facing a real dilemma, and one that viewers could relate to. What it needed, in other words, was drama. And much like how genuine that script might be, what happened next is also up for debate. Ed Catmull in Creativity Inc. claims that just a few months into production, Pixar approached Disney to suggest making Toy Story 2 a theatrical picture, as a direct-to-video market was not for them. He writes, "We had nothing against the direct-to-video model in theory. Disney was doing it and making heaps of money. We just didn't know how to go about it without sacrificing quality." In the Toy Story films, Ash Brannon is quoted as saying everyone working on the movie knew it should be on the big screen and not just a cash-in. In James Stewart's Disney War, it suggested that Disney executive Joe Roth was the one who pushed for Toy Story 2 to be released theatrically by the House of Mouse, and perhaps that decision came from a screening of test footage in November of 1997 that is written about in a Variety article from February 5th, 1998, which writes, "Disney animation topper Pete Schneider said that after seeing early rushes, we think that the sequel has all the right ingredients to be another hit. The company decided to delay the release another year so that the high-tech tune could be readied for a major theatrical run." One other potential reason for the switch to the big screen comes from Dave Price's The Pixar Touch, who reminds us that the whole reason to make Toy Story 2 a straight-to-video release in the first place was to keep costs down. Remember, Return of Jafar cost a tenth of Aladdin's total budget, but Pixar doing it in-house was not as cheap as farming things out to Disney's cheaper French and Korean animation studios. Price writes, "As it turned out, the economics of a direct-to-video Pixar film weren't working as well as hoped." The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but Toy Story 2's direction was now headed a different way, and rather than be a straight-to-video cash grab, it was now headed for the silver screen for the 1999 holiday season. Unfortunately for Pixar, Disney felt that releasing Toy Story 2 theatrically did not count to their new current 5-picture deal because, as Price writes in The Pixar Touch, Disney had bargained in their contract 5 original features, not sequels, thus ensuring 5 sets of new characters for its theme parks and merchandise. Pixar, already disgruntled with their Disney deal, were further disgruntled with this Disney deal. But that was a top-level issue. There was a much bigger issue on the ground. It's amazing how one small mistake can domino so quickly. During the movie's production, sometime in 1998, Pixar's chief technical officer, Oren Jacob, was checking some files of the movie in a meeting with modeling artist Larry Cutler, and noticed that Woody's hat just disappeared. Then Woody himself disappeared. One refresh later, and a folder with 40 items suddenly had 4, then 0. One by one, sequences and characters began to disappear. The best way to imagine it is like Marty's picture in Back to the Future. The files of Toy Story 2 were being, as Doc Brown puts it, erased from existence.
Oh, great Scott!
The piece of code, RMRF*, is often used to clear out unwanted files in a particular folder, but when done at the root folder, deletes everything. As Matthew Panzarino writes in his 2012 Next Web article, How Pixar's Toy Story 2 Was Deleted Twice, the system was recursively tracking down through all the file structure and deleting its way out, like a worm eating its way out of the core of an apple. Jacob explains that everyone at Pixar worked on projects on the same network, designed that you could access all projects from any station. He told Panzarino Pixar being a wide open Unix environment meant that it was very promiscuous. You could change directory /net/ or walk across the network and log into Ed Catmull's machine or Steve Jobs' machine if you wanted to. Not that Steve ever did any work on the film directly, but you could do that. Realizing they were on the brink of disaster, the plug was pulled and all machines were shut down. When they booted everything back up, the file size of Toy Story 2 was about 10% of what it should have been. But all was not lost, as they had their backups. A Bug's Life had a similar deletion issue when they lost a bunch of the ants, but they were able to salvage and restore it. The problem, however, was in 1998, Pixar backed up all data to tape, around 4 gigabytes in size. When the tape was full, anything new saved to it should trigger an error log. However, in the case of Toy Story 2, the file to fire that trigger was also on the full drive, which meant its file size was 0 and didn't work. Not knowing they were working from old data, the Pixar team figured they'd only lost about a week's worth of work. That was until the data they were using started acting strangely, and things weren't interacting with other things as they should. Jacob explains, "We started doing comparisons of the shots and realized that the show was incomplete. How it had worked for that week and how such renders came out, I can't explain. They realized that while they thought they were working off version 420, they were actually only on about version 20 of the movie's build. It wasn't just that they only had 10% of the movie, they didn't even know what 10% they had. This is where technical director Galen Sussman revealed that, due to working from home as part of her maternity leave, had a silicon graphics machine at her house that had an original file tree copied and a full copy of the movie. More crucially, because it was at her home, it was not connected to the Pixar Unix environment, meaning that her computer had not been hit by the deletion. She and Owen drove her machine back to the Pixar headquarters and they plugged it in. They waited and breathed a sigh of relief. The version that Sussman had was only about 2 weeks old, missing around 30,000 files. The film could still be saved. Over a hectic weekend, 10 to 12 Pixar employees worked day and night in 8-hour shifts to check and recover, by hand, the missing files to get a complete movie once more. Jacob recalls when people came in on a Friday, we'd hand them a printout of, here are the 500 things you're checking for the next 8 hours. Start running xdiff commands, go for it. And when that weekend was all said and done, they had done the impossible. They saved Toy Story 2. And Galen Sussman became a figure of legend within Pixar, which is why in June of 2023, social media was aghast and appalled when it was revealed that Sussman had been let go by Pixar. Sussman was among 75 names to be fired from Pixar, reportedly due to the poor performance of Lightyear, and in TMZ's reporting of the news, they ran the headline, Disney Pixar lays off Galen Sussman. Thanks for saving Toy Story 2, now get out! Which would be true if the movie that she saved was the one that got released. Because the movie that Sussman and others saved is not the Toy Story 2 we know today, because that Toy Story 2 was deleted again, and this time it was deleted on purpose. After finishing the European promotional tour of A Bug's Life, John Lasseter, along with Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter and Joe Ranft, saw a screening of the salvaged Toy Story 2 in December of 1998 and decided one thing: this was not good enough. This had been brewing for some time. Ed Catmull writes in Creativity Inc. At Pixar, the directors would gather every few months to screen reels of their film, splice together drawings paired with what's called temp music and voices. First reels are a very rough approximation of what the final product will be. They're flawed and messy no matter how good the team is making them, but looking at them is the only way to see what needs fixing. You cannot judge a team by the early reels. You do hope, however, that over time the reels get better. In this case, they weren't getting better. Months would pass and the reels were still varying degrees of bad. According to Catmull, Andrew Stanton used the word disaster to describe the movie, and they felt that they were now making the B-level movie they told Disney they didn't want to make when it was pitched as a straight-to-video affair. While he was working on A Bug's Life, Lasseter kept telling everyone to give it time, but it never improved. In the Toy Story films, Lasseter is quoted as saying, "Steve Jobs called me in Seoul, South Korea, and said, I think we have a problem with Toy Story 2. Lasseter rewatched the original Toy Story, on Laserdisc no less, and finally agreed that this needed to be saved. Production was shut down in late 1998, and Lasseter held a writing summit at his house over the holiday period to flesh out this new version of Toy Story 2. Some things would remain, Woody being a collectible, Al and the toy barn, and Woody's torn arm, while a few other things were brought in from rejected ideas for Toy Story 1. The film opening with a Buzz Lightyear scene, a video game rather than the cartoon as pitched for the first movie, adding Barbie to the movie, Woody's nightmare of Andy not wanting to play with him anymore. And then, some things were changed. For starters, it was argued that it needed better female representation on screen. In the Pixar Touch, Price describes the character of Senorita Cactus as someone who was only there to sway Woody with her feminine wiles. Price notes that the reason Senorita Cactus was changed to Jessie in the second iteration of the movie was actually down to John Lasseter's wife Nancy. He writes Nancy had impressed him to include a character in Toy Story 2 for girls, one with more substance than Bo Peep. The other change that was made, Catmull writes in Creativity Inc., was adding Wheezy to the story. They felt that Woody's choice to stay with the Roundup gang or go back to Andy's room was too easy, but Wheezy acted as a tangible what if for Woody. Wheezy, with his broken squeaker, was shelved by Andy's mum and there he remained. Woody, with his torn arm, could face the same future. While all the other toys get played with, he would spend eternity watching from the sidelines. But perhaps the biggest change, as Owen explains in that Next Web article, effectively all animation was tossed. Effectively all layout was tossed. So the camera work would start from scratch. Lighting was in the film a little bit, but that was tossed as well. We had to build new characters. The problem Pixar faced with doing this at the start of 1999 was that the movie had a release date that couldn't be moved, and that release date was the holiday season of 1999. Tentpole movies have hard release dates, and they have to hit those release dates. Merchandise, sponsorship, TV spots, theatre screens are all booked and prepared for that date. Matthew Panzarino writes for Next Web, to blow a film like Toy Story 2, not release it on time, would have decimated the studio's credibility and detonated the Disney movie economy. Producer Karen Robert Jackson told Price for the Pixar Touch, "I was sat in Steve Jobs' office and was utterly convinced that we can make a great movie here. I just don't think we can do it in the time that we have." Steve basically said, "Well, we have no choice." Production on this new Toy Story 2 began in January of 1999. Colin Brady stepped down as director, or was pushed depending on who is telling the story. Ash Brannon remained on as co-director along with Lee Unkrich, while John Lasseter stepped in as the film's lead director. They had 7 months to make a whole new movie. Bearing in mind that the first bit of animation for the original Toy Story was screened for Disney in June of 1992, 3 years before its eventual release. Ed Catmull writes in Creativity Inc., "We were asking our crew to perform the cinematic equivalent of a heart transplant." To save time, it wasn't just story beats from scrapped ideas of Toy Story 1 that were reused, as assets from that movie were given a polish to update them to 1999 technology standards. And an island from A Bug's Life was remodeled to be both the alien homeworld that Buzz Lightyear visits at the start of the movie and the idyllic woodland setting from Jesse's backstory. The model of Jerry from Pixar's short Jerry's Game was reused to be the cleaner, hired by Al to restore Woody to his original glory. It was, to put it mildly, a stressful 7 months. Several of the computer staff got carpal tunnel syndrome, but worse still is this story from the Pixar Touch. The situation came to a head when an overstressed and overworked animator set off to work with his infant child, having agreed with his wife to drop them off at daycare that morning. When he spoke with his wife later that day, she casually asked how the drop-off had gone, and he realized only then that he had, in his mental haze, completely forgotten. The baby was still in the back seat of his car in the parking lot. Thankfully, the baby was fine. Oren Jacob told Matthew Panzarino for Next Web in 2012, "January to September 99 was an unbelievable Herculean effort to pull that show off from the ground up again. That was one of the defining cornerstones of what Pixar as a corporate culture meant to itself inside." Galen Sussman thought it couldn't be done. Disney didn't think it could be done. But 100-hour working weeks over a 7-month period meant that Pixar's Toy Story 2 was finished on time, and it was a huge hit. Toy Story 2 opened over Thanksgiving 1999 and would eventually gross nearly $500 million worldwide. The hard work of everyone at Pixar paid off, and what could have been a throwaway cheap cash-in video grab became widely regarded as one of the greatest sequels of all time. And that incredible hard work is part of the lore of what makes Toy Story 2 so special. And part of that lore of Toy Story 2 is the story of Galen Sussman saving the movie after it was nearly deleted. So why would Disney tell this white lie for so long? Well, because it's a good story. One of the best sequels to ever grace the silver screen was nearly lost because of one line of code, but was saved because a staff member was on maternity leave and had a machine at her house. It's a great story. It's amazing how much the story has shaped Toy Story 2's history. Just look at that TMZ article from Sussman's firing. There were people on Twitter who argue that she should have had a job at Pixar for life because she saved one of the studio's greatest achievements, not knowing that the version she saved was deemed not good enough to be released. But there is another good story within the making of Toy Story 2. How incredible it is that Toy Story 2 is as great as it is. Lee Unkrich is quoted as saying, "We did the impossible and we did it spectacularly well." In Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull describes Toy Story 2 as a turning point for Pixar as they learned two key things. Firstly, you can't just promote junior animators without the support of senior staff members to help them, and secondly, and more importantly, you cannot sacrifice quality when making a Pixar movie. Story is key, and the heart and emotion of that story is paramount. It's amazing how the simple addition of Wheezy changes the perception of Woody's dilemma. Giving Jessie the tragic backstory, and seeing that backstory play out soundtracked by the beautiful Sarah McLachlan track, gives some real stakes to Woody's choice. It also makes Jessie a more rounded character, and that impacts Stinky Pete, Bullseye, and Woody. Catmull writes that both versions of the Woody had the same plot spine, Woody's choice of whether to stay or go. He writes one version didn't work at all, and the other one is deeply affecting. Why? Talented storytellers found a way to make an audience care. If you give a great idea to a mediocre team, they will screw it up. If you give a mediocre idea to a brilliant team, they will either fix it or throw it away and come up with something better. And they did fix it. Toy Story 2 is one of the greatest sequels ever made. And the next time someone at a party asks you if you know the story about how it was nearly deleted, tell them what really happened. Or point them to this YouTube video, because every view counts.
Have you ever wondered, why does the Street Fighter movie look nothing like the Street Fighter game? Why is this movie, which should be about street fighting martial artists and warriors, actually about a group of army folk going up against a mad dictator hell-bent on world domination?
Look at this.
It certainly doesn't feel